Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Each week, we gather to discuss how being a follower of Jesus impacts our everyday lives. Whether you have been a believer for a long time or still have lots of questions about faith, we would love to have you join us as we embrace the joy of a transformed life. Welcome back to another week of Tuesday Talks. My name is Bridgett, and once again, I will be your host. And on today's show, I have with me Brian and Susan Scott. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bridgett.
Thanks for having us.
So these, like I've told you guys all this season, I have gone in and found my favorite people on the planet, and I have brought them to our podcast family. And so Brian and Susan have just been an excellent role model and champion for me as I'm trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing in this whole ministry life. And have helped me process some of my meltdowns and just have said, hey, it's all going to be okay. So today's conversation, we're calling it Love for the Long Haul. And so many of us as Christians, as people who are leaders, but also like in our own family, in our own marriages, we're really quick to jump in when love is all easy. It's romantic, it's fun, it's this new adventure. But what do we do when we've said yes to God for a whole life and we're in a season of obedience isn't so sexy? Obedience is just the loving response of what we do to friends because Jesus wants us as friends. And so before we kind of jump into our conversation, would you guys give us a quick little window into your story? First question is, when did you meet Jesus?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
We grew up in Marion, Ohio, and I attended Smelter Road Alliance Church, which is now called Cornerstone in Marion. And at the time, the popular thing to do was to go to Beulah Beach in the summer. And my very first year of being at Smelter Road, my closest friends said, hey, we're going to Beulah Beach. And I joined right in because that's what everybody was doing. And so 7th grade year, went to Beulah Beach Church Camp and experienced life beyond anything I ever thought imaginable, of figuring out what does it mean to really follow Jesus and understanding the gift that he had given me. So I just remember during one of the sessions, the speaker gave an altar call, and I just felt myself rising up and sobbing like a little baby, going to the front. And my counselor at the time, Sean, she came walking over, sat down with me. We prayed together, and I accepted Christ. And our youth pastor at the time, Brian and I were in youth group together, but our youth group pastor at the time, as soon as we came back at our next youth meeting, he had me share with the entire group what had happened in my life when I went to Beulah Beach. And that was the beginning of a journey for me.
Cool. That's awesome. How about you, Brian?
For me, it was the traditional, I don't want to go to hell, because I heard a lot about heaven. I heard a lot about hell growing up in a Christian home, hearing preaching all the time. I mean, obviously every week. And not that anybody bullied me into it, but there was that sense of fear. So I can remember consistently asking Jesus to forgive my sin. It was a constant, whatever I've done today, however I've displeased you, just forgive me, and that I would remain in good standing and avoid hell. I think probably when I was 13, it became a pursuit and not an avoidance. And I was just tired of the double life, even at the age of 13. Yeah. That I wanted it all or nothing. And so I really went to a place of surrender. I said, all right, Jesus, I'm done. I'm done playing the game. So in the Alliance, I would say that would be a lordship decision, a crisis point in my life. Soon after, I was filled, I believe, with the Holy Spirit for the first time at Beulah Beach. And so it began a process of really allowing Jesus to lord my sanctification process.
Yeah, that's so good. So both of you now are serving in ministry. Susan, you are the women's director, and Brian, you are serving in a regional leadership role in our denomination. And so let's kind of unpack that for a little bit. Was that a dream that you guys had when you first got married, or is it something that Jesus tricked you into?
Oh,
No.
Bridgett, that was not a dream. I was very satisfied when Brian was in the business world. And I don't know if you remember this, honey, but when we were in Fort Wayne, Indiana, our pastor at the time went through this series, and I can't even remember what it was titled or anything like that, but he was just talking about how you can live for God in your workplace. And I just remember the Lord being like, yep, that's where he has you, Susan. I was staying at home with the kids, and Brian was working as an accountant. And I was like, yep, that's our calling. We're going to be lights for him in this place called Central Soya. And I was very content with that. And then lo and behold, Brian came home one day and said, hey, well, I don't want to take your story, honey. Do you want to tell your story?
Sure. She probably tells it better than I do, but I was an accountant, and I really actually didn't like accounting.
He was never at his desk.
But it allowed me to understand the business, whatever business I was in, more deeply, and gave me opportunity for more advancement. And I had all these things in mind. I was promoted to the corporate office in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And a good friend of mine was my boss. I wasn't a good friend at that time. He is now. But he basically said, you will learn this business for about 5 years, really not knowing exactly why you're doing what you're doing. It sort of mirrors my life of Jesus. But he said, just do what I tell you to do, and there will be a time when it will click.
Yeah.
About 5 years in, it clicked, and I absolutely loved my job.
Right.
I loved the people I worked for, the people I worked with. Just loved it. And Jesus said, all right, now you're done. It was as plain as we're talking here. And so, no, it was never a plan.
Yeah. And actually, our closest friends, Bridgett, I don't know if I ever told you this, but our closest friends at the time were on staff at the church that we were attending in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They stayed with Peyton, our oldest, when I went into the hospital to have Jordan. And, we were together a lot. And he was the assistant pastor at the church. And Brian, the lead pastor at the time, had walked by Brian in the hallway one day and just in passing said, hey, have you ever thought about going in the ministry? And that just sent Brian's mind whirling. He came home like, I love to learn. I've been talking about going back to school. What do you think? And lo and behold, Grace Theological Seminary was hosting classes in our building. And so he started taking classes, and that couple that became our closest friends got an offer to move to Columbus, Indiana. And that left a vacancy on staff at the church that we were attending. And Brian applied for it and was given the position. So all of a sudden, going from not doing ministry to doing ministry in the workplace and doing ministry on staff at a church. He was working 2 jobs for a little while.
Yeah. So what has the journey been like from 2 very young students at summer camp to now being adults with children of your own? What does it look like for you specifically in this season to maintain a deep friendship with Jesus?
For me, I've had to be intentional just to have that relationship with Jesus, because I could, in the role I'm in, stay very busy with doing Jesus things and being involved in church things, but not having it ever, Bridgett, be personal. Like, I could minister to other people, speak over other people's lives. I could attend a Bible study. I can be even in a prayer group. I can do all those things. But if I am not carving out time in my day and in my week, in my month, to be intentional about my own personal relationship with the Lord, it doesn't happen. So I have to be very intentional. That's the word I keep saying, but that's the only thing I can think. And so practicing some spiritual rhythms. A good friend of mine has been teaching me some disciplines. And
can you tell us what those look like for you?
Sure.
When you say this word intentional, like if someone is new to faith, what does that mean to be intentional with Jesus?
Thank you for asking that. That's a great question. intentional for Jesus for me actually means planning.
Mm-hmm.
I have to look at my week and say, this is the day that I've carved out. And it was really hard when I started in this position to try to figure out what is a day of the week that works for Brian's schedule, works for our kids' schedule, works for my schedule, that I could make sure that I have some breathing room. I have a rest day. And so for me, I know before my week starts, Wednesdays are my day.
Cool.
That I will put as much as I can on hold, other than spending time with the Lord. Sometimes it means falling asleep on my couch. Sometimes it means sitting with my Bible open. Sometimes it means going for a walk and just being totally quiet, unplugged, trying to not look at my phone, trying to not check emails,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of things. So that's intentional for me.
Yeah, that's good.
And then you asked about spiritual rhythms.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I just said to you are what I've started trying to make sure I'm making a practice, is being quiet. I'm an extrovert. Brian jokes and tells people that one time I took a test, Myers-Briggs, and I got 100% on the extrovert part. So is that because you
whether the results came back 100% or not, I live with her. She's 100% extroverted.
So that just for me to have solitude is a gigantic step for
Mm-hmm.
me. So on Wednesdays, I know that that's going to, for the most part, be a day that I am going to unplug, be away from people, and as much as I can. Now, Bible study, I usually go in at 5:00. So it's not even a full 24 hours,
Mm-hmm.
but I just try to not have things distract me. I have quiet. I have a friend that taught me closed hands, open hands, which is a practice that I do when I'm holding on to something. I've been trying to incorporate some breath prayers, which would be some intentional, just one-line phrases that the Lord has been giving to me and refreshing in me, that at certain times during the day, I'm just speaking out loud to Him.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Brian, are you an introvert?
I'm right on the line.
Okay.
So I process externally,
okay,
which is a sign that I'm really more extroverted, but I have introverted tendencies.
I'm the same way. I say I'm an externally processing introvert.
It's a good way to say it.
So how are you either being intentional, or what has been here's a question I have. I guess I'm changing my mind. How have you done things differently? So Susan gave us kind of like, this is hers, but that's not the perfect way to hang out with Jesus. That's Susan's perfect way to hang out with Jesus. So I think for married couples to understand, like, just because one spouse can sit and pray for an hour doesn't mean the spouse that can do, 30-second prayers throughout the day isn't sinful. You know what I mean? It's just two different personalities. So how have you, number one, how have you connected with Jesus? But also, like, how have you guys, as a married couple, honored each other that you have different personalities in the way that you encounter God?
I'd say first, I'm an introverted thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my life in wrestle with the Spirit of God is internal. It's not externally processed. And so that I do a lot of driving, so I got a lot of windshield time. And that's a lot of scripture, a lot of just silence, worship. I mean, that's one of the benefits of having to do a lot of travel. And I'll say this, with our relationship, she probably could, but it's not natural, nor am I more bent to say, let's read the Bible together.
Mm-hmm.
Let's sit in the same spot and pray over these things together. Not that that's good or bad or indifferent. So this new thing that we've always wrestled with that. It's more of when things have happened. Of course, I'm going to Jesus in my own thoughts. Susan likes to externally process those things. But I think we've always wrestled with all right, well, it's night and we're going to bed, although we go to bed probably 2 or 3 hours different than, I go to bed late, she goes to bed early. So we've always wrestled with, okay, we're going to pray now, because that's what good couples do. And it was always a thing of guilt when I would be talking to married couples and saying, you need to share your spiritual journey with one another. We do talk deep things together. It's always been, I don't know, it's been natural for us to talk through deep spiritual things together naturally. But the formality of some of the things that families and couples do always left me feeling almost guilty, almost shame when I would talk to people about these things. But yet I think God has released that from me. And this new thing that we're walking through now, spiritual companioning, gives some guidelines, some boundaries, which really helps Susan, or she really likes that.
I love it.
I'm intuitive, so I don't heed to structure a lot of times. I'm more apt to like to do things free flowing and call it spiritual. And call those structures and systems non-spiritual, which is not the truth.
Not true.
And so that's helped us, I think, in our relationship. It does give opportunity when I don't share all the things that are going on in my head with Susan. It gives that place. It gives a placeholder for us to be able to share those things that aren't we haven't shared together.
Yeah. Okay. So this, honestly, I think is one of the coolest things I've ever heard. So I want you guys to, first of all, you mentioned the term, Brian, spiritual companioning. How do I say it? Okay, great.
Companioning.
Yay, A+. So what is it? And can you just walk people through, like, how do you actually do that as a couple?
So we have to give credit to our close friends for showing us this. And we're actually doing this with couples within our district, cool. our leadership scope. The premise is that if you're not spending time with Jesus, actually listening to what he says, on your own, then what do you have to share? You can't give away something you don't have. And so it's imperative, obviously, that you are engaging Jesus on deep levels and you're wrestling with him on the deeper things of your life and your soul. And then whenever you determine, was it weekly or bi-weekly or whatever, there's a certain time you sit down, and it's very regimented, which is out of character for me. But you spend 2 minutes in silence, and you allow God to ready your soul to
sitting with each other.
Just sitting with one another, 2 minutes.
We sit side by side, which I love, because then he's not looking at me, I'm not llooking at him. We're just sitting together.
Okay.
And then one person facilitates and basically asks the question, okay, what, you have something on your heart that you would love to share. And that person spends 8 to 10 minutes if they need that much time. For me, I don't need that much time. Sometimes Susan does, which is great, which is fine. Where they express the things that they have encountered the Spirit on during that week or during that time frame. There are strict guidelines of not commenting or critiquing or asking questions. It is legit that the person shares and there's no response on the facilitator. I'm
allowed to nod when he's talking, and I lean in a lot, and every once in a while a little or something like that will escape, but I'm not allowed to
which if you've been married 29 years, sometimes there's some hidden meaning behind the ums.
But no.
I'm kidding.
No.
And then you spend 2 more minutes of silence. And then in that silence, you're asking Jesus, for both of you are asking Jesus, obviously for the facilitator on behalf of your companion, but also for the person that's being facilitated. You're asking Jesus for insight. What do you want me to know? Jesus, what are you thinking? What's your heart? He speaks to me more in vision and picture and more in words with Susan. but then after that 2 minutes, then the person's being facilitated has the opportunity to share what they saw Jesus say, or hear what they heard Jesus say, or see what Jesus gave them. And then the facilitator then expresses what they saw or what they heard. And then the facilitator asks the one being facilitated if there's anything that they want to speak back to Jesus after hearing what the facilitator had and what they saw. And then the facilitator prays. And they don't pray preachy prayers or instructive videos.
To know that they really are,
Right.
It's a prayer blessing. And for me, that's probably one of my favorite parts. I love when the Lord gives Brian a picture, and sometimes you can tell, like, it's coming out of his mouth, like, I'm not really sure why I'm saying this to you, but Bridgett, to have someone just speak this picture, which I'm sure you've experienced, or you know what I'm talking about, of what the Lord gave them, is just precious to me. And then at the end, to have that blessing prayed over me is worth its weight in gold.
So then it switches. Obviously, the other person then facilitates, and they go through the same thing.
So how long is this taking? How long does this take?
30, 40 minutes?
Yeah, 30 or 40 minutes. I think obviously it'll fluctuate depending on what's going on in your life and what Jesus is saying. But for me, so much of our life with Jesus, when it has to do with your spouse or a companion or a friendship, it's like you're talking with your friend or your spouse, and then you maybe get some clarification from Jesus, or you talk to him about what you guys said or whatever. You get his blessing on what you're thinking. Where this is more like, now all three of us are sitting there, and it's like, well, Jesus, here's what I hear you saying, and you're communicating that so the person can hear it.
Yeah.
And then that person's like, Jesus, is that what you're saying? And can you confirm that? And it's a conversation with the three of you, instead of it being, hey, we're going to sit and we're going to pray over these concerns. And whatever he says to us, we're not really going to give him we're not going to give him margin or opportunity to speak back to us. We feel good getting it off our chest, and we did it together. And then, we feel much better about ourselves and about our marriage. This is not only bringing him in, but just sitting there and sitting at his feet and saying, Jesus, what are you thinking? What's your heart?
Expectancy. There's an expectancy. And the thing I also have appreciated, Bridgett, is you get up from that space and you leave. And it's an understanding that I'm not going to bring up to Brian anything that he shared with me. And he's not going to bring up to me later in conversations, hey, do you remember when we were companioning and you said this? That's not what that's
off
for.
Limits.
It is off limits, unless I come to him and say, hey, this was what I brought up, and can we talk about it some more? I would love to talk with. That's my prerogative, but it's not his. It's not his to do.
So if you're the one sharing, you're allowed to bring it up to your spouse, but if the spouse is the one asking the questions, they're not allowed to bring it up again.
Right.
Correct.
Right. And Bridgett, it doesn't have to just be spouses. It can be friends. I've done this with a girl friend of mine.
Cool.
And I think I sobbed more with her than I probably have with Brian, just because I feel like with Brian, we live life a lot closer, but with friends, in some ways you can sort of hide some of that stuff. And so to be vulnerable and expose some yuckiness, for me, usually that's what's happening, is the Lord in my quiet time, he's put his finger on something and I'm struggling with something, and I've written it down usually to try to remember. So when I get to companion again, then that's something that I can just bring up and have a conversation with the Lord about, and have someone walk it through with me. That's the precious part in that.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think that'll be a great tool for people.
Yeah.
As we continue on our conversation today, before we head out, I just want to touch on just what have you learned? So you have 3 children. that are young adults. What are their ages?
22, 20, and Bryson is 17, but he'll be 18 next month.
Okay. So you're almost to the empty nest stage.
Yes.
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 So how has that changed parenting? I feel like, especially for Christian parents, there's this major fear that Satan pushes people when your kids leave underneath your roof. Can you just kind of pull that apart a little bit? What have you learned? What advice would you share for parents that are in this same stage?
Some time ago, when the kids were still young, I was in my quiet time with Jesus, and I was concerned with, I think most parents feel guilt about their parenting because we think that a certain parenting style or approach is going to produce some kind of predetermined outcome in our kids, which is ludicrous. But I was in that time, and he gave me a vision, and I saw Jesus with his hand on my shoulder, and I had my hands on my kids.
Cool.
And that was encouraging. And I said, thanks, Jesus. I appreciate that. I recognize that you're helping me in my parenting. And he said, look again. And his other hand was on my kids.
Yeah.
And he said, I am parenting your kids. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I choose to parent them through you. Mm-hmm. I've given you that responsibility, but I am parenting your kids.
That's cool.
And another time, he stopped me because I like to take over the lordship of my own sanctification process and others. I think it's a gift that I have. And one time he had to stop me and rebuke me basically and say, you will not determine what intimacy looks like with me and your kids.
Yeah.
I will determine what intimacy looks like, not you.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was freeing as well, because kids get to, obviously our kids' age, they're living out their faith, and they have to own that, and they have to determine based on how they're wired, based on their shadow, based on the things that they've experienced, how they're going to relate to Jesus, and how are they going to submit themselves to him. And we're all in process, and it looks awfully different. So we struggled a little bit, at times when like our kids weren't engaging in youth group, as if, a church youth group is the savior of our kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was something that came to mind.
Yeah. And it's been wonderful for me to have Brian, because he balances me out in my personality traits. I'm an ESFJ in Myers-Briggs, and that means control. So as our kids have been moving out of our house, and I'm getting less and less control and even less knowledge of how they're using their time and their money, and are they even waking up to go to church on Sunday and things like that, that can drive me a little, over the edge on occasion. And so Brian would always just remind me, and the Lord was so gracious. The word he gave me as soon as our oldest went off to college was trust. Mm-hmm. And he kept saying, I want you to trust me. I want you to trust me. I want you to trust me. And that has been sort of my mantra is, Lord, I trust you. And I do that closed hands, open hands thing I was talking about, mm-hmm. where I hold on to something. And then I say, Lord, you tell me to cast all my cares upon you because you care for me and you care for my kids. And I open my hands physically, Bridgett, and I hand my kids over to the Lord and just say, I'm trusting you with them because I know you've got it. And I obviously can't control them. So
yeah,
it's been hard. It's been really hard, and sad. I hate walking by their bedroom doors and their doors are closed in their rooms. Mm-hmm. My girls used to sing, and now there's no music coming from those rooms. But when they pop in for a little while and that music comes again, I pretty much drop everything. And whenever any of my kids now initiate any sort of conversation with me, mm-hmm. I try to stop whatever I'm doing, wherever I am. And I just long to have those conversations with them again because they're few and far between. And I want them to know that they're a priority to me. So it's sweet. and I don't want to leave the room. I came home the other night and 2 of my kids were sitting in the family room. And so I didn't even take my coat off. Did you notice I didn't take my coat off? I didn't even take my coat off. I came and just sat down in another chair and just sat to be in the room with them because 2 of my kids were in the same room. And I just wanted to be there and hear what they were talking about, to see what they were doing and that. So it's just really, it's changed a lot.
Yeah, that's so good. So I'm just going to kind of recap for our listeners what we talked about today. We're talking about love for the long haul. And so number 1, you have to know who you are as a child of God first. And you're going to have to be intentional about the time that you set aside to spend time with Jesus and to grow in your faith, which will then impact the way that you can love one another, whether friends or spouses or however it is, which will change the way that you lead your children because you realize that God is God and you're not. And the way that you are a leader, whether that's in your local church or whether that's in your job or wherever it is, wherever God has given you influence, that we didn't sign up to say yes once. We signed up to say yes for a lifetime. And sometimes that yes is not always so pretty, but it's a choice we get to make for love. So guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I love you guys, and I'm just so appreciative that you'd spend some time with our listeners today.
Thank you, Bridgett. We love you too so much. Thanks
for having us.
Thanks, guys. As always, you can share these episodes on social media. Your friends will want to hear. And if you have any stories of how these messages are touching your life, always reach out to us. We'd love to hear your stories. We'll meet you back next Tuesday for another episode of Tuesday Talks. Thanks for listening to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a review, and be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. If you would like to join our conversation on social media, be sure to use the hashtag TuesdayTalksWithSAC. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.